Welcome to the Daily Insider here on Vegas Insider. I am Kevin Rogers. Today is Thursday, January 13th, 2022, and it's Thursday, so Vince Akins will join us. He's been on the last few Fridays. He was on normally during football season on Thursdays, but he was on Fridays the last 2 weeks, but now back to his normal Thursday slot here, and he has plenty of trends for the 6 playoff games coming up this weekend in the NFL, so we'll talk to Vince coming up in just a few moments to discuss those 6 games and some interesting things that are going to come out from Vince in that. So we're looking forward to that. Also look forward to the NBA schedule tonight. Warriors-Bucks, the premier game in the NBA. So all of that is straight ahead. First, I want to tell you about BetMGM. They are the king of sports books. New players only. Bet $10 to win $200 if your team scores a touchdown. Bet on any NFL money line. And if your team scores a touchdown, you'll receive an additional $200 in free bets. Again, new players only, must be 21 years or older to play. It is legal in the following states: Arizona, New Jersey, Indiana, Colorado, Tennessee, West Virginia, Iowa, Virginia, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Washington, D.C. only. Full terms and conditions apply. That is BetMGM. They are the king of sportsbooks. Let's bring on Vince Akins as he joins us every week during football season. Go over the top trends that are out there. And Vince, I will give you kudos on this one. You nailed the Raiders-Chargers over last week. That one pretty much never in doubt. Okay, let me rephrase that. The Chargers need a bit of a rally to get that one closer, but at least you nailed that one, so it was a good finish to the regular season.
Yeah, that was a game. It always felt like, even though the Chargers hit that over with a few minutes left, it felt like a game where the Chargers were, once they started playing from behind, were eventually going to fill up the scoreboard a little bit. Yeah, and it turned out, by the time you got to overtime and 3 field goals, you got to 67 points in that game. And on the score sheet, looks like it was never in doubt.
So we go from that. We go from the Raiders beating the Chargers to, let's go right into it. First game Saturday, Raiders and the Bengals. And the really historical stuff doesn't matter as far as the Raiders haven't won a playoff game in years. Bengals haven't won one since 90 or whatever. It's been that long. So we don't really worry about Boomer Esiason and Rich Gannon and guys like that. But the Bengals laying 5.5 here at BetMGM. And first off, Cincinnati, now Joe Burrow, first time he's won. He's been in the playoffs in 2 years. But the Raiders with Derek Carr, which is interesting too, Vince. Derek Carr's never won a playoff game. He took the Raiders all the way to the playoffs before getting hurt at the end of the year a few years ago. They lost to Houston in the opening round. But what do you have here? Second time these teams are meeting up. Raiders lost the Bengals at home. I'm sure there's some good things you got for this game.
Yeah, and postseason's always a great time that I enjoy, and because there's some really nice, in addition to the normal trends and systems we share, there's some really good playoff stuff, and I'm going to sprinkle out a few of those throughout these games we go over here today. Starting with, you mentioned that these teams met. It was week 11. The Raiders lost 32-13 at home in a game that wasn't particularly close. So curious playoff teams and same season rematches, and we have a few of those coming up here. Teams that lost by at least 12 points in the previous regular season matchup that same season. So if it's divisional teams, that the second matchup, or in this case, the only matchup of the season, teams that lost by at least 12 points in that last meeting are 27-15 against the spread in the playoffs against this team. So 64%. And that's going to come a couple of times here as we go through these games. So, a nice bounce back. Team got blown out in the regular season. Sometimes that gets overvalued when you look at these playoff matchups. Another interesting playoff specific nugget here. The saying always goes, Kevin, I'm sure, playoff defense wins in the playoffs. And that's the idea. Well, the Raiders actually have the worst defense among these teams left in the playoffs, allowing 25.8 points per game. So what does that actually mean? I sometimes do Mythbusters segments and some Mythbusters articles in the past. It's just not true, that idea that defense wins in the playoffs when it comes to the very worst defenses. So playoff teams that have allowed 24.3 points per game or higher. This goes back looking at the last 20 years of playoff games. 24.3 points per game or more, 16-5 against the spread in playoff games. And actually, you might think, okay, those teams are getting a lot of points. They're actually 15-7 overall in those playoff games as well, so not a whole lot different. So teams that have been really pretty poor defensively, the Raiders allowing almost 26 points per game here, certainly qualify in the season. They've actually performed pretty well in the playoffs, which is not what I think the general consensus would be. And then finally, we're going to turn back to a couple of team trends here when we look at this total of the game. One of the higher totals on the 6-game slate at 49. To start with, Bengals in high total games at home. So going back to October 2018, Bengals are 11-1-1 on the over. So 11 overs, 1 under, and 1 push. In home games where the total's at least 47. So Bengals hosting here, higher total game. That has led to some real shootouts for the Bengals looking back the last 4 seasons here. In a similar time frame, looking back to 2016, the Bengals 7-0-1 on the over-under. So 7 overs and a push as a home favorite coming off a loss as a dog. So last week they were dogs against the Browns. That game that didn't have a ton of meeting. Now switching the home favorite this next week, that has led to high-scoring games for the Bengals.
Yeah, that first trend, Vince. Playoff teams that lost the same season meeting against the team they're playing by at least 12 points, 27-15 against the spread, 64%. Like that's really interesting because that first meeting with the Raiders and the Bengals was actually a close game for a while, and Cincinnati opened it up in the fourth quarter. I think they had 19 points in the fourth. So the Raiders hung, in both those teams too, Vince. Raiders were blown out by the Chiefs the week before at home, and the Bengals got blown out by the Browns at home the week before. That was the early pick six that Burrow threw, and then Cleveland just destroyed them. So both those teams were kind of in desperation mode in that game. And also you wonder going into this one, Bengals coming off like a throwaway game at Cleveland last week where the Raiders needed to win to get in. So, yeah, you kind of wonder here. Now the Raiders getting a few more points they did the last time against the Bengals.
Yeah, the Bengals' home performance this season has been pretty interesting, too. Obviously, they won some big home games down the stretch, but they also, you mentioned, got blown out by Cleveland in the middle of the season, got blown out by the Chargers at home during this season. So it's been hit or miss for the Bengals this season against some playoff contending teams at home.
All right, the Saturday night game, Patriots and Bills. Third meeting between these two. Bills lost to the Patriots on that Monday night in the windstorm. Mac Jones 3 passes. Patriots ran the ball down the Bills' throat. Bills still had some shots to win that game. In Foxborough, Bills run them out. And now when the weather is a little more conducive to them, Bills were fine. Now it's going to be really, really cold on Saturday night. You're not going to have the wind issue like you had that first meeting. But New England, great road team this year. You're getting Belichick as a playoff dog. What are your thoughts here? What do you have with the Bills and the Patriots?
Sure, a couple nuggets here. To begin with, I mentioned that system we just talked about. The Patriots actually lost 33-21 in Week 16, so that barely qualifies with that 12-point spread in that second same season meeting. So the Patriots qualified in that 27-15 trend I mentioned there. Also, speaking of playoff rematches, these teams just met 3 weeks ago. So a little bit of an interesting nugget here. Playoff rematches of teams that met within the last 5 weeks, and that's going to come up a couple of times as well as we go through these games. The overs hit 61% of the time, 23-15 over under. So these near rematches, which sometimes when you think about those games, you think second time or third time in this case, have just seen each other recently. That helps the defense in the next game. That's actually not been the case when it comes to the playoffs, and it's pushed things towards the over in this game. It's 44. Speaking of the over, a team trend to talk about these teams. And this one goes back a ways to 2004. The Bills are 14-0 over under as a favor of more than 3 points when they allowed less than 250 yards last game. And I mentioned that one goes back ways. It is 4-0 in just the last 2 seasons, though. So some interesting recent performance there. 4 overs. Last week, the Bills defense could not have looked better against the Jets, holding them to under 100 yards in that week 18. Excuse me, I'm used to saying week 17, final week of the regular season. That week 18 win over the Jets.
And also with the Bills too, Vince, that last year with the change of the playoff format, only one team had the bye. So you had the rare home team playing in back-to-back the first 2 rounds. You don't normally see that. You win the first round, you go on the road in the second round. That changed because Buffalo played Indianapolis at home in the first round, then Baltimore at home in a Saturday night cold game. That was a close one. And then they had the pick 6 on Lamar Jackson late in that game. But the Bills, though, at least now with Josh Allen, what's funny is this team has a little more of the playoff edge experience-wise. Yeah, we know Belichick has on one side. Still a rookie quarterback. But Josh Allen, though, 3 playoff games last year. They hung with the Chiefs for a bit before losing in the AFC title game. But 2 wins at home. So at least that's one thing going for the Bills in this game.
Yeah, I think it's going to be interesting. I remember us talking a few weeks ago about the first meeting between these teams and, why Josh Allen didn't run the ball more leading up to that second meeting. The second meeting, they really put the ball in Josh Allen's hands, and they scored 33 points, handled the Patriots fairly easily in that game. So it's going to be interesting because actually, the Bills have not been a huge running team all season, but other than that Patriots game, it mixed them in there a little bit. They've really established Devin Singletary the last 4 or 5 weeks on the season where they've become a more balanced offense. It's going to be interesting to see, do they try to rely on that run against a pretty strong Patriots run defense, or do they go put the ball in Josh Allen's hands again in a cold night, maybe let him run the ball a little more as well now that the season's on the line in this playoff matchup.
Sunday, Eagles, Bucks. That's another rematch. And Tampa Bay was up comfortably over Philadelphia. That's a Thursday night game in October. And the Eagles came back, had that late touchdown to cover. I mean, Tampa Bay was in control of that game. But Buccaneers laying 8.5. They didn't play a home game in the playoffs last year. I'm not counting the Super Bowl. But in the first 3 rounds, all on the road for Brady and the Bucks. Now they're at home. Philly runs the ball a bunch of times. They're gonna have a bunch of yardage trying to bleed the clock. But what do you have here with the Bucks back at home against the Eagles?
Sure. So I'm going to share a couple of against the spread playoff systems, one on each side here, and we'll see how those compare. First with the Eagles, obviously, not the greatest record in the season, with just 9 wins coming into the playoffs. Teams that won less than 10 playoff games, or excuse me, less than 10 regular season games in their first playoff game of the season are 23-12 against the spread. So right around 65% there against the spread in their first playoff game. Interestingly, and maybe we'll talk about this next week if they happen to pull an upside here, teams that get beyond the first playoff game of the season with less than 10 wins tend to really struggle then in the next round. But in that first round, you think the teams that just limped in, as the Eagles were as a 9-win team, have actually exceeded expectations pretty significantly there with that 23-12 against the spread record. Now something favoring the Bucks and actually going against the Eagles here. So you mentioned the Eagles. They're probably going to try to run the ball. And it's kind of a tough matchup when you think about the Buccaneers having the 3rd-ranked run defense in the league. But the Eagles are the top ranked rush offense by a pretty significant margin, running for 159 yards per game here in the season. So playoff underdogs that have run for at least 150 yards per game. So the top rushing teams in the league, but they're underdog in a playoff game, which isn't necessarily a run favorable setup here. Obviously, the Eagles laying 8.5 points. Not typically a line where you think teams are really going to be able to pound the ball, commit to the run. So what happens in those games? Teams are just 6-15 against the spread. Those are playoff underdogs that run for at least 150 yards per game. So a couple of competing systems looking at this game. I do want to point out a very interesting team trend that's active on the Eagles here. The Eagles have gone over 13 straight games. This one goes back to December 2012. It's been active several times the last 2 seasons as well. As a road underdog facing a team that throws at least 37 passes per game. And that's interesting because Tampa Bay leads the league by a wide margin, averaging 43 pass attempts per game. They're almost 4 pass attempts ahead of the 2nd-ranked team in the league. So, we talk about the Eagles want to run, Tampa wants to pass. For the Bengals, for the Eagles, facing a team that wants to throw the ball often, they're in a road dog situation here, has led to a lot of overs and high-scoring games for Philadelphia.
The first meeting, too, just go back to that, Vince. 28-22, the Bucks won in Philadelphia. Total close at 53. So now you're at a 47.5. So now you wonder, are we going to go opposite? Is it going to go? I mean, it still had 50 points in that game. I mean, it went under. And I mean, you know this better than anybody that you can still finish under in a game. It doesn't make it low scoring. It just stayed under that total. You could have an NBA game at 240 that ends at 125, 122. No, let me do my math again. 125, 110, let's just say, under 240. It's still a high-scoring game. So it's like in this one, it was 53 was the total, still landed on 50, and this total is 47.5. Again, I just like to look at those things from the first matchup compared to the second matchup.
Yeah, that's a game I saw as someone who had Bucks minus 6.5 in that game, the 2-point version. I remember that game very, very specifically. But the Bucks did move the ball really easily for the first about 2.5 to 3 quarters of that game before kind of shutting down their offense in the 4th quarter. And it really felt like a game that the Buccaneers could have scored more than 28 points in if they were so inclined. They played things a little conservatively down the stretch with the 3 touchdown lead that got whittled down there a little bit. But so, Tampa Bay's offense really had a lot of success early in that first game.
Well, remember too, they had the ball at like the 20, and then Brady, and then they kneeled on it at the end for like 2 minutes to go.
Oh yeah, it was either the third down they could have scored a touchdown,
Yeah.
or they could have got stopped on fourth down, kicked a field goal to cover still.
Right.
But there was like four yards between the end zone and the first down line.
Well, Brady's got sportsmanship. He's a gamesman. That's why he wanted to just get out of there. All right, 49ers Cowboys Sunday afternoon in Dallas. Very, very, very intriguing matchup with these two. Only game out of the 6 that is not a rematch from the regular season. So we have information on the other games, not on this one though. San Francisco needed the massive rally against LA to get in the playoffs, but the 49ers, after the slow start, they've been great over the last few months. Dallas, off that blowout of Philadelphia, say what you want. I mean, Hurts didn't play, but the Cowboys' offense was clicking. You got to give them that. Now you wonder, all the pressure seriously still on the Cowboys, because the world's going to end if the Cowboys lose this game. But do you think San Francisco, you think the momentum, what do you have with your trends saying for the 49ers and Cowboys?
Yeah, so this is an interesting game. Probably the game of the week if you're asking me to pick. And again, this is going to be one where I'm going to offer a couple of against the spread, divergent trends and systems here. And then we'll talk about the total briefly. There's an interesting nugget there as well. To start with, looking playoff specific again, the 49ers have only been underdogs 3 times in the season, which is something that's a little bit interesting to think about considering their record on the year, and that they weren't they weren't a team at the top of the standings for the whole season. They've only been underdogs in 3 games. That includes last week, and actually 2 of those have come against the Rams. But playoff underdogs that have been underdogs no more than 3 times on the season, so this is a rare spot for them, and now they're underdogs come playoffs, and these tough matchups are 38-25 against the spread. So 60% cover rate for those are teams that are underdogs in the playoffs, but haven't been underdogs more than 3 times during the regular season. And that qualifies for the 49ers. However, this is a really interesting nugget here, and this is the at least the team trend of the week. It might be one of the most interesting nugget on the slate. You have the total at 50 and a half there. It's been at 51 during this week. The 49ers, this one goes back to November 2016, are 0-12-1 against the spread and 0-13 overall in games where the total's over 50. That's the only condition. So high total games, we're talking about these highest total games of over 50. 49ers have not won a single one, losing all 13 the last 5+ seasons, 0-12-1 against the spread in those games as well. So really kind of an issue. I was pretty shocked when I saw that one this week as well. So now an interesting nugget. We'll turn to the total here on the Dallas side. The 49ers obviously a pretty run-heavy, balanced team. They're 29th in the league in passing, only attempting 30.2 passes per game. The Cowboys, goes back to 2016 as well, have gone over in all 14 games they've played against an opponent that has averaged less than 31 passes per game. So teams that don't pass the ball often, the Cowboys, their dynamic offense, the style of defense they've played over that time, have forced high-scoring games against teams that are, oftentimes don't pass the ball, aren't typically the most high-scoring games. San Francisco falls more in the middle of the pack as far as that goes, with their effective run and pass attack, even with limited passes. But really interesting, some high-scoring games from Dallas over that time against teams that don't pass the ball very often.
All right, yeah, that's going to be a really good game, and both guys got the pressure on them. Garoppolo, Dak, and see who advances on to the second round. Now, Sunday night, Pittsburgh and Kansas City. They meet at Arrowhead, and the Steelers kind of snuck through the back door, and you see now reflecting in the point spread, 12.5-point dogs. Chiefs destroyed them a few weeks ago at Arrowhead. Now we'll see what Big Ben's got left in the tank, if anything, considering it's probably his last game, assuming the Chiefs don't slip up here. But what do you have with the Steelers and the Chiefs?
Sure. A couple things here, and then several of the playoff systems that we've talked about already are active, which I'll cover here at the end. But to begin with, just an interesting nugget. The Steelers 12.5 points, and that kind of sticks out. The last time Pittsburgh was an underdog of more than 10 points in a game was 2007. And that's actually the only time it's happened since 2000. This is really kind of a historical line as far as the Steelers go. Actually, the only time they've been more than a 7-point dog in a game the last 5 seasons, going back to 2016, was the first meeting against the Chiefs just a few weeks ago, where they finished as 10-point dogs there. So this is obviously a huge line for a playoff game, getting the 12.5 points. Interestingly, double-digit favorites in the playoffs. Go back to January 16th, 2011. So last 10 plus years are 10-0 against the spread. So you get this happening about once per season. Before that, they'd actually not performed all that well against the spread as big favorites. But lately, going back 10 years, and maybe even a little more than lately, but really heavy favorites in the playoffs have performed well going 10-0 against the spread. The Chiefs have been in this situation once in a pretty famous 51-31 win over Houston 2 years ago, where they gave Houston a 24-point cushion and then rallied back not only to win, but to cover that game 51-31 was pretty amazing. There are several things that we've already touched on that are active in this game as well. The Steelers at 9-7-1 are a team that won less than 10 games on the season. Their first playoff game, that's 23-12 against the spread. Obviously, these teams just met 3 weeks ago, and everyone remembers the Steelers getting crushed in that game, 36-10. That also activates the first system we talked about, where teams are 27-15 against the spread, when they lost to the team by at least 12 points in the last same season meeting. And that matchup having come just 3 weeks ago activates the over-under system I talked about, where teams have met in the last 5 weeks favoring the over.
So, I mean, the double-digit favorites, so they've done well in the playoffs, obviously. The Pittsburgh thing, it just goes to show you, as far as the dog of more than 10 points, the only time since 2007. It just shows the consistency of the Steelers, that they just don't get in that spot really ever under Mike Tomlin. I mean, the story going down the stretch, going to that Cleveland game, was Tom was trying to avoid his first losing season of his career. They obviously didn't get it because they won the final 2 games. But when you're not in last place, chances are you're never going to be a 10-plus point underdog. So that's why it's so rare to see the Steelers in this spot. And also at Kansas City, Vince, that the Chiefs, they played, they had a slow start to the season. The defense really stepped up. We know we have offensively with Mahomes and Kelsey and Tyreek Hill if he's healthy. But I just really wonder, I mean, deep down, do you think the Steelers can hang in this one, or just Kansas City's got too much firepower?
Yeah, I think there's some room for the Steelers to cover this game, but hang being sort of a loose term when you think about that 12.5 point line. I do think there are scenarios where the Steelers defense plays a little better than expected. Maybe this isn't all that high scoring of a game. The Steelers, lose competitive-ish one-score game, or even lose by 10 points, where the Chiefs, aren't really looking to run up the score if they're getting a couple of spots. Obviously, they're historically, Andy Reid hasn't done that well as a playoff favorite. That's changed the last few years against or with the Chiefs. But I think there are scenarios definitely where, even if, Big Ben doesn't play that well, the Steelers defense steps up, keeps this game a little lower scoring. We know the Chiefs' main offensive weapons are banged up a little bit here, though they all should be playing in this game. But, maybe this is a 24-14, 24-17 type Chiefs win where the Steelers could still manage to cover.
I mean, the Chiefs, they got to be kicking themselves for losing that Bengals game a few weeks ago, not being the number 1 seed, not getting the extra week off, and the Titans now the number 1 seed. Now the Monday night game, Cardinals and Rams, first Monday night game we're seeing in the playoffs, and road team won both meetings this year. Arizona dominated them at SoFi Stadium earlier in the year. Rams beat them on a Monday night in Arizona a few weeks ago. Arizona stunk at home to close the season, but a great road team, only 1 loss this year away from the Valley. So what do you have here with the Rams and the Cardinals for the final game?
Sure. A few nuggets here. To start with, this is a playoff rematch as well of a game that happened in the last 5 weeks. That wasn't a blowout, but that favors the over for these playoff games, as we've talked about. However, I'm going to mention a team trend. And this is actually one I mentioned last week when it was 0-10 towards the under. Now it's 1-10. The Rams, the past 2 seasons at home, past week 4 of the season. It's now 1-10 over under. Obviously, just went over last week with San Francisco. But even that game, went to overtime. It went over with, just a few seconds left in regulation. Most of that game, that didn't necessarily feel like a high score. That wasn't necessarily a high scoring shootout either, though it did, we talked about games and their game flow compared to the over under. That was a game, it did go over, but I wouldn't necessarily call that convincing over, a game that was set up most of the way to go over the total. And finally, a little nugget here on the Cardinals. This one goes back to December 2018. They are 9-0 against the spread on the road when they allowed at least 400 yards last game. So poor defensive performance, 400-plus yards. Their defense really struggled last week, allowing 431 yards to the Seahawks, a game that shouldn't have been that important to Seattle, yet their offense had a big day in that 38-30 Seattle victory. So the Cardinals defense has bounced back in recent years after such a game.
Vince Akins, you could find him on Twitter at SB Breakers. Always a great job finding the trends and the systems, and he joins us all season long during the NFL campaign to talk about NFL and also during college, when college is here, talk college football trends as well. You can find Vince's picks on Vegas Insider, NFL, college football, NBA. All of that is there. Vince, thank you so much for the time. We appreciate it, and we'll talk to you next week when we trim this field in half.
Absolutely. Let's enjoy this 6-game slate, and we'll talk again next week.
All right. There is Vince Akins. Always enjoy having him on, and a lot of interesting trends and systems that he brings up. And the one that still gets me is the Steeler one, that they are never a double-digit underdog. It shows you how good of a job Mike Tomlin's done. I mean, all these teams have gone through ups and downs over the years. Even the Chiefs were bad for a little bit before they got Andy Reid. And you look at a lot of them. The Patriots had one down year last year without Brady. They still were 7-9 last year. But Pittsburgh has found a way to stay consistent. They really have. And you got a lot of good matchups throughout this weekend. Philly-Tampa. I wonder if Philly can hang in that one. DraftKings Championship Series. You can check it out, DraftKings.com. Also in New York, DraftKings is rolling. So if you're in the Empire State, check out DraftKings. Check out that goat. He could be walking somewhere in Times Square wearing that crown. You never know. But DraftKings, the Championship Series, the ultimate competition of contest winners from daily fantasy sports, sportsbook, and casino, the one and only place you can compete in the king of competitions. The best of the best in each domain will compete for series supremacy in their own domain's tournament of champions. They'll have one goal in mind: win the ultimate crown and earn the title of the greatest of all time, the GOAT. You could see him in Times Square. He could be at Roy Rogers having some chicken fingers. You never know. But that GOAT, though, you can be that GOAT. Just go to DraftKings.com for more details. All right, let's look at some NBA now. And tonight, you have 5 games on the slate. And let's begin with the big boy, that being Golden State and Milwaukee, as they hook up at Fiserv Forum. All right, number one, Golden State off that loss to Memphis a few nights ago. And Memphis, we'll talk about in a minute because they get Minnesota at home. That's an interesting line, too. Golden State 30-10. They're rocking and rolling. They're still fine in spite of the loss to Memphis. They've lost 3 or 4 now. Long season. We're not going to get on anybody because they've lost 3 or 4. Even great teams lose some here and there. But Warriors now have dropped 3 in a row on the road. You can throw out that New Orleans game because Steph didn't play, Draymond didn't play. That was right before Klay Thompson came back. So the Warriors had like nothing in that game. Throw that one out. Losing by 17 to Dallas, that's a tough one to get over. But the Memphis game, though, on Tuesday, the Warriors led going to the fourth quarter. And then Memphis outscored Golden State 29-18 in the final 12 minutes. Steph had 27, Klay Thompson 14. Again, he's easing his way back in. No Draymond. But the Warriors, though, we'll see if they get back on track. The Bucks, they've lost 4 or 5. So when you look at these two powerhouses, two teams that could, I mean, the Bucks were in the NBA Finals, won the NBA Finals last year. Milwaukee's dropped 4 or 5. Golden State has lost 3 or 4. Giannis didn't play in that Toronto game during the stretch, but the one win came at Brooklyn, incidentally. But also the Bucks have a pair of losses to the Hornets. So Milwaukee laying 1.5. Very tough game, but both these teams are in desperate need of a win. Minnesota is at Memphis, and the Timberwolves lost to the Pelicans a few nights ago to fall back below 500. They had won 4 straight, and they lost in the final seconds. Brandon Ingram hit that 3 with like 0.3 of a second left, so it wasn't a buzzer beater. But Minnesota now 20-21. Memphis at 29-14. Memphis has won 10 straight. They've covered 9 times during the stretch. But yet the Grizzlies laying 4.5. Very interesting. Even though Steven Adams remains out, but in the game against Golden State on Tuesday, John Morant had a big game. This is what Memphis does well. They just have so many role players that know how to step up. Dylan Brooks is still out. They have so many guys that just step up, and it's a well-coached team. Minnesota, again, had their 4-game winning streak snapped at New Orleans. They've scored a ton of points the last few games. They've gone way over. Listen to this last 3 games. They've scored 135, 141, and 125. Now, granted, they played Oklahoma City, Houston, and New Orleans. So not exactly 3 playoff teams, but Minnesota's offense, though, they're clicking. All right, speaking of the Pelicans, they get the Clippers tonight in New Orleans Smoothie King Center. The Clippers have lost twice to the Pelicans this season, both as a favorite. Now they're flipped to an underdog. And the Pelicans, they have won 2 of 3. They have some nice home wins of late, beating Golden State, and again, no Steph. Beating Cleveland. They beat Portland. They lost to Phoenix and Utah, 2 upper-tier teams in the West. But some of these wins, they beat Milwaukee at home a while ago, no Giannis. They beat Golden State without Steph. You guys still got to take that into consideration. Now, the Clippers have won 2 in a row after they had some struggles. They beat Atlanta and Denver at home as dogs. And in the Denver win, they were down 25. Came back and won. I don't know how teams come from 25 down and win 87-85. The Clippers had 28 points in the first half. In the first half on Tuesday, they scored 28 points and still came back and won that game. Down 11 going to the fourth quarter. Terrible job by the Nuggets. We'll talk about them in a minute, too. They play later. But I'm really curious to see what the Clippers do here, trying to avoid 3 losses this season to the Pelicans. The Thunder and the Nets tonight, the Kevin Durant Bowl. Feels like Brooklyn's played like 10 games the last 5 days, just with everything going on. They were at home. Man, what a stretch. This is 4 and 5 nights for Brooklyn. They beat San Antonio at home in that noon game at Barclays Center in overtime. 121-119 Sunday. They fly out to Portland after that. Portland Monday night, lose by 6. They go to Chicago last night. They dominate the Bulls 138-112. Now you come back for Oklahoma City, laying 7.5. Kyrie's not going to play tonight. Oklahoma City has been an unbelievable underdog. Now 5-1 against the spread their last 6. And just one of the better underdogs in the league this year, especially on the road. Oklahoma City, though, has lost 5 straight. And when they played Brooklyn earlier this year, they lost 120-96 at home. That was back in November. But this Nets team, 4 and 5 nights. You don't see that often in the NBA, and that's simply because of makeups. They had to play 2 makeup games during that stretch. Blazers and the Nuggets, playoff matchup from last year. This year, Blazers ain't going to the playoffs. I'll tell you that much. Damian Lillard, he's out for a bit. He had abdominal surgery. 16 and 24. They're 2 and 13 on the road. Portland. Denver's only 9 and 7 at home. Nuggets have lost their home court advantage at Ball Arena. 20 and 19 overall. They squandered that 25-point lead to the Clippers a few nights ago. They're 1 and 4 ATS their last 5. They're 3 and 7 ATS their last 10. The Blazers have won 2 in a row. They beat the Kings and the Nets as a home underdog. They finished under the total in 3 straight. But Portland now with the nice little road swing, Denver, and then they go out east, Washington, Orlando, Miami. Denver, the good news for them is they're back home for a bit. Lakers, Jazz on a back-to-back, then the Clippers. And this season, Denver and Portland, they have split a pair of matchups, home team winning each time, both in dominating fashion. But again, Damian Lillard remains out. CJ McCollum out. Anthony Simons isn't playing. He's out as well. And yeah, Denver, who knocked out Portland last year in the playoffs, they're going to try to do it again. 8 of the last 9 have finished over the total. But with all these guys out for Portland, you wonder if the Blazers can get offense going. Got to think Denver's offense will pick up a bit after they were thoroughly embarrassed by the Clippers in that game. Even though they lost by 2 points, still blowing a 25-point lead is not something to be proud of ever. In college basketball tonight, a couple Big Ten matchups, Ohio State, Wisconsin, Badgers laying 3.5 in that one. Also, Indiana, Iowa. Iowa's got up to a rough start in the Big Ten. And Iowa laying right now 4.5 at home to the Hoosiers. Oregon, UCLA, Pac-12 late night, 9:30. UCLA a 10-point favorite at home. BYU, Gonzaga, 11 o'clock out in Spokane. Gonzaga laying 15. They lay 15 or more to everybody. A lot of Conference USA, Sun Belt Summit, Horizon dominating tonight. Seton Hall, DePaul, 5 o'clock tip in the Big East. Seton Hall laying 6. DePaul's been bad. DePaul actually took the lead against Marquette in the second half the other night, and then Marquette just totally steamrolled. Then Marquette's actually played a lot better since the slow start in the Big East under Shaka Smart, and DePaul has just been a disaster. They're just DePauling it. That's what they do. BetMGM, the king of sports books. Bet $10 to win $200 if your team scores a touchdown. Bet on any NFL money line. And if your team scores a touchdown, you'll receive an additional $200 in free bets. New players only. Must be 21 years or older to play. Legal in the following states: Arizona, New Jersey, Indiana, Colorado, Tennessee, West Virginia, Iowa, Virginia, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Washington, D.C. only. Full terms and conditions apply. That's BetMGM. They are the king of sports books. My thanks to Vince Akins for joining us today, going over the trends and the systems for Wild Card Weekend in the NFL. I am Kevin Rogers. We'll be back with you tomorrow to wrap up the week and, again, look at the NFL playoff games, look ahead to the weekend. All that coming up at noon Eastern. You can find it on our YouTube channel at Vegas Insider. I am Kevin Rogers. Thanks a lot for watching, and as always, best of luck with your bets.